Well, hello there. How you doing there, AP? Set that timer running. Um, we're going to try and set a land speed record and do a little review here on AP Chapter 5. I'll make another one for Chapter 6. On these little reviews, we're going to have to skim them. There's just way too much information for us, and considering that the new test, the DBQ, is 5 documents, um, if you read my post, I would not be surprised if this test question is a continuity and change over time with 5 documents. I think in the post I said, could you see them doing a continuity and change over time over something like the growth of federal power from the time of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists to Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal? Could you do a continuity and change DBQ over that? I bet you could. So if they're going to do a DBQ that covers all of Unit 3, which starts with Chapter 5, Unit 3 up through the end of Chapter 23, it's going to have to be some big broad scope. It's going to have to do something with people's rights. I would just think logically. Nobody will guess correctly what the DBQ is, I don't think, but just looking at it in that sense. Also, there's tons of good stuff out on the internet looking for DBQ practice. I just posted something today. You can always search Khan Academy. Just type in APUSH DBQ examples in Google and you'll get a ton of stuff. Okay, so quick review. Your Chapter 5 notes. This was back in October, the first week of October. This was right after the French and Indian War, and here's the map of the colonial holdings of Great Britain in the New World in 1763, and the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War in Europe, had caused England's national debt to go through the roof. And remember, one of the things that had happened over in the American colonies is that the French and Indian War showed that the English royal governors didn't have a lot of power. And the other thing that the English were upset about is that most of the good things of the war went to the colonists, and it was the English that were shouldering the burden. And the English thought that the American colonists should pay their fair share, which is why we have the Revenue Act of 1762, which is designed to seize American smugglers, and sent an English army to the New World, to the English colonies, excuse me. So we have also the colonists had printed paper money, and the Currency Act banned that because the American money wasn't as valuable as the English money. And then here comes some of these biggies. The Sugar Act. Remember the Sugar Act that replaced the Molasses Act? This is where the American colonists were distilling rum. And so the Americans just flat decided they were going to ignore this law by bribing customs officials, smuggling rum into the area. And this is the end of salutary neglect. And if you remember, for a while, the colonists, for a long time, had been left alone by the British. And when the Sugar Act comes in, the colonists argued, was a violation of the English Constitution, and it was a tax. Taxes ought to originate with the people. And then when the Sugar Act starts being judged by vice admiralty courts, which is the rules based on the high seas by English appointed judges, the colonists got mad because they were used to being judged by colonial judges. And if you were a smuggler and you got caught in North Carolina and you're judged by a North Carolina judge, he's going to find you not guilty. On the flip side of that, if you replace that judge with someone from England, people are going to get into trouble. And they started to argue, and we did an AP poster party over this. You may remember this. This was one side had England has the right to tax the colonies, and the other side had the argument England has no right to tax the colonies. And we made posters and had the arguments and posted them up on the hall. The bottom line is that the colonists started to argue that they were being treated as second-class subjects of the king. And then the Stamp Act. Oh, the fatal stamp. Do you remember the fatal stamp? Where they taxed everything, court documents, land titles, newspapers. And this was all serving as revenue to support the English army that's in America, protecting the Americans from Native Americans, etc. And then we throw into this the Quartering Act, where the colonists were required to support and let British soldiers live in their barracks. This is irritating to the colonists. Parliamentary supremacy. Here we get this problem. Um, there's a constitutional confrontation with the colonies on taxation, on jury trials, military quartering, and the question of self-representative government. So the colonists feel like at this time period that they're losing rights that they've had. They feel like the English are taking advantage of them. And so that is the end of chapter 5, section 1. Drop that guy down and bring up 5.2. This is kind of the road to rebellion, 1765 to 1770. This is the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act Congress, where you have the Patriots that went to the Stamp Act Congress of 1765, issued their list of resolves. They attacked the constitutionality of the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act. They declared that only the colonists elected representatives could tax them. And they were really irritated about the loss of trial by jury and being tried by vice admiralty courts. They're not looking for independence. They're looking for compromise. This is where we get the Sons of Liberty. And I believe that I showed you a scene from the film John Adams where they had tarred and feathered a tax collector, which was a pretty grim scene. So this is the Sons of Liberty, and they're out to destroy England's authority and to destroy stamp collectors, warehouses, and things like that. Okay, this is really important, guys. This is the intellectual traditions that lead to the American Revolution. The Enlightenment thinkers, natural rights, and John Locke, Montesquieu with separation of powers. You really need to go back and look at those documents again or look at those people up again. And this concept of English common law. Okay? So, moving on, we go to the Declaratory Act, which comes out of Parliament in 1766. They had repealed the Stamp Act because the colonists were so upset about it. But on the back end of that, the Prime Minister of England, Charles Townshend, put this Declaratory Act that said that Parliament does have the authority to make laws that are binding on the colonists, which the colonists do not like at all, because the colonists think that the colonists should rule themselves, if you recall. Let's go through this one. Now, letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. American Women, Daughters of Liberty. Okay, so bottom line on this, all this resistance to taxation is going to cause the British to send more troops. We've got the 2,000 troops that go into Boston, led by Thomas Gage, and they're in Boston because the American colonists are flat refusing to pay these stamp taxes, and they're harassing English tax collectors. And so we have the Boston Massacre occurs when you've got the crowd that's throwing rocks and snowballs at the soldiers, who fire back and kill 5 colonists. And then, of course, Paul Revere has this engraving made up and passed all throughout the colonies about the massacre. And Sam Adams calls it the massacre, and he whips up all this anti-English fury. So that's not going to be on the test, I think. We'll go to the next one. Sorry, man, this is as hard to do as fast as I would like. 5.3, the road to independence. This is going to take us to the Boston Tea Party. By the way, what I need is a haircut party. Pretty soon, I'll be able to flip my hair and I'll look like a shampoo commercial. All right, Tea Act. So you've got the East India Company, the Tea Act, and Sam Adams, who's created the Committee of Correspondence, where the various patriots are sending information back and forth. They burn the English customs ship Gaspé. The Tea Act comes out by Parliament, which made British tea a lot cheaper than the stuff that the Americans were smuggling in, but the Americans don't like this. They said, well, you're making the English tea cheaper than the smuggled tea, so that we'll buy the English tea. It's not the price, it's the tax that's the irritating thing. They don't want to pay the tax on the British tea. So even if it's cheaper, just as a point of pride, they refuse to pay it. So that takes us to the Boston Tea Party there, um, where a shipment of tea has arrived. The ship's owner demands to have that taxed, and 342 chests of tea wind up getting dumped into the Boston Harbor by the Patriots. When that happens, and that was in today's money, that was millions of dollars in today's money. The British Parliament is ticked, and they create the four coercive acts, which we're going to later know as the Intolerable Acts. So in your notes, this should say Coercive Act, aka Intolerable Acts. This is the Port Bill, which closed Boston Port, the Massachusetts Government Act, which revoked Massachusetts charter colony status and banned town meetings, a stricter quartering act for barracks for British troops, and the Administration of Justice Act, which takes all capital crimes, crimes like murder, death penalty, and transfers them from that colony of Massachusetts to somewhere else, guaranteeing very possibly that people are going to be found guilty. Okay? I didn't really want that to do that. I just wanted it to go there. There we go. So that takes us to the Continental Congress. Our big delegates there are John Adams, George Washington, and John Jay in Philadelphia in 1774. And here's what they proposed. They demand that England repeal the Coercive Acts. They denied the power of the Declaratory Act. They said Parliament does not have the right to make laws for colonies. And then they decided they were going to do a non-importation act. They were going to hurt Britain economically by refusing to buy any goods. England argues that this is an illegal assembly and refused to negotiate at all with the First Continental Congress. And the English argued that Americans have to pay for their own defense, accept England's authority to tax them, and then impose a naval blockade on American trade with foreign nations. So we weren't allowed to trade with anybody else. And then the army was told, eliminate dissent. And so I'm going to leave these guys here. Maybe. Yeah. And go to independence and the shot heard around the world. Okay, so General Gage in September of 1774, he's going to send troops out of Boston to capture an armory that's got a bunch of Patriot weapons. And remember, the Patriots were known as Minutemen, local militia that were ready to turn into citizen soldiers at a minute's notice. And in April 1775, General Gage is going to send soldiers out to capture Sam Adams, John Hancock, and these Patriot weapons at Concord. First at Lexington, the Patriots exchange fire with the British, and then at Concord again, and then on the British retreat back to Boston, the Patriots are pot-shotting them from behind bushes and behind walls all the way back to Boston, and in the end, the British have 74 killed and 174 wounded, and it's the shot heard around the world. Unfortunately, AP cares nothing about battles and wars. So with that in mind, we're pretty much going to skip the Battle of Breeds and Bunker Hill. But by the time those two battles were fought, when we did try, some moderates in the colonies put out an olive branch to the king. That was like, no. And so then John Adams and Patrick Henry get us on the road to the Declaration of Independence with their declaration of the cause and necessity of taking up arms. And then comes Thomas Paine's common sense. Remember, Thomas Paine was a British guy who was in debt and was about to be thrown in jail in England, and it's very likely that Benjamin Franklin helped get him to the colonies. And when he got here, he wrote this little pamphlet called Common Sense, which called for independence of the colonies, and republicanism, which is power is in the hands of the legislature and an elected president, not with a monarch. So he's looking forward to the type of government we're going to have eventually. It sold 100,000 copies in 3 months. That's the equivalent, I think, today of 13 million downloads. And he argued that we should just reject King George, which takes us to the Declaration of Independence. So that's originally done on July 2nd as the approval. July 4th is the final approval of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, of course, wrote that. It starts off with a laundry list of grievances against the king, but the most important parts are: all men are created equal, all men possess the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and government derives its power from the consent of the government. So what you want to link, what he links in this document is individual liberty, popular sovereignty, the people rule, and republican government with the concept of independence. And those are the values. So that is leading us up to the American Revolution. So this was Chapter 5 review, The Road to Revolution. Bye.